Hi folks, Seth Leipson here. Thanks for watching my monologue. In these uncertain times, you may be thinking about personal protection. If you are, I urge you to visit my friends at Guns Etc. They'll help you find the perfect protection for yourself and your family, and they can even teach you how to use it. They've been protecting Arizonans for over 33 years, and they stand for the great principles this country was founded upon. Or you can just click on gunsetcetera.com. And if you like my monologues, please subscribe to 960 The Patriots YouTube channel. Welcome back, and happy Tuesday, November 24th, 2020. In the Arizona Republic this morning, Froma Harrop, a nationally syndicated columnist, condemns conservatives for ginning up the culture wars again and writes that it's all cheap politics and small beer. She reaches so far to criticize a writer from Commentary magazine for mentioning a critical race theory piece that is some years old and from a little-known independent corporate trainer from somewhere in the Midwest. Her point: when you have to find really old and small things to find a grievance, your reach not only exceeds your grasp, but your grasp of the problem. You're nearly inventing it, she says. Come on, conservatives, get over this race stuff. It's no big deal, and it's not that widespread, she tells us. Find other wars to wage. What other wars we should fight, she does not tell us. But speaking for me, I think fighting for the notion that Thurgood Marshall fought for in the 1950s and that we seem to have forgotten and turned around on is worth a fight. In two briefs, he wrote, quote, "Distinctions by race are so evil, so arbitrary and invidious that a state bound to defend the equal protection of the laws must not involve them in any public sphere. Classifications and distinctions based on race or color have no moral or legal validity in our society. They are contrary to our Constitution and laws," Thurgood Marshall wrote. Would Miss Harrop have told Thurgood Marshall, then chief counsel at the NAACP, to quit quibbling about trifles? Perhaps Miss Harrop is unaware of the goings-on that are not quite so small here, after all. Perhaps she is unaware that the Smithsonian Museum this year dedicated an exhibit to understanding whiteness, complete with a lecture from a dedicated Marxist on the meaning of whiteness, which is to say, race, and complete with a guide on how to tell if someone is white or is influenced by white culture or even acting white. To remind, this gem from the Smithsonian came out of the National Museum of African American History. And before we go any further, just keep in mind the museum's charter was signed into law by a white man named George Bush. Quote, "Whiteness and white racialized identity refer to the way that white people, their customs, culture, and beliefs operate as the standard by which all other groups are compared." That's how the Smithsonian lectured us this year. Continuing, quote, "Whiteness is also at the core of understanding race in America. Whiteness and the normalization of white racial identity throughout America's history have created a culture where non-white persons are seen as inferior or abnormal. This white dominant culture also operates as a social mechanism that grants advantages to white people since they can navigate society both by feeling normal and by being viewed as normal. Persons who identify as white rarely have to think about their racial identity because they live within a culture where whiteness has been normalized. Thinking about race is very different for non-white persons living in America. People of color must always consider their racial identity wherever the situation due to the systemic and interpersonal racism that still exists," close quote. Then they give us a chart, or did, a chart that shows you how to know whiteness. It includes beliefs in self-reliance, literally, not making this up. It includes the belief in rugged individualism. It includes belief in the nuclear family, helpfully explaining that 2.3 children is an example of whiteness, just in case you need a for instance, let's say. Not making it up. Emphasis on the scientific method is a sign of whiteness. Again, not making this up. You almost think we're entering Jeff Foxworthy territory here. You might just know you're white if you believe in hard work is the key to success and that work must come before play. That's in there too. Those are all on the chart. Honestly, truly, work before play. It's on the chart. How about this? Christianity is the norm. Well, as I like to say, somebody better tell the King family, maybe Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton too, all Christian reverends, they might just be white after all. Or at least suffering from, as the Smithsonian puts it, whiteness. We were a country our National Museum thought needed a chart this year to identify whiteness. There were regimes once that made others wear yellow stars so you could know their ancestry. But yep, that's the comparison you deserve when you think ethnicity determines your humanity. Is that small and insignificant, Miss Harrop? There's a lot of this going on. John Moravsky writes, in dramatic, urgent language, K-12 schools across the country, both public and private, profess solidarity with Black Lives Matter and vowed to dismantle white supremacy as they scrambled to introduce anti-racist courses and remake themselves into racism-free zones. I have to pause and think about a school as a racist zone until this year. They are now considered racism-free zones. What were they before this year? Educators at the prestigious Brentwood College School in Los Angeles have made more changes to the curriculum this year than any other in the private school's nearly 5-decade history. Teachers are introducing critical race theory, which views U.S. history through the prism of racial conflict, and assigning readings from Ibram Kendi, the academic and author who contends race-neutral policies are the bulwark of the white ethno-state. The white ethno-state. That's what fifth graders get to learn about. I'm not even sure college students know what that is. I'd be happier if fifth graders could learn to read and write and add and subtract. Well, that's not important, evidently, not as important as understanding the white ethno-state. Studying the works of Ibram Kendi is more important, of course. He, by the way, is the professor who said you can't be against racism and a capitalist. So maybe traditional skills like reading, writing, and arithmetic just aren't important in Brentwood anymore. Or too many other places. Quote, while some view these recent shifts as indoctrination, we see them as opportunities for engagement, Brentwood's head of school, Mike Riera, wrote to families this fall, acknowledging the growing resistance from some parents. Will we overstep in some areas, he asks? Possibly. Will we understep in others? Possibly. Overstepping is okay in training about matters of race. We call this education now. Fabienne Doucet, a New York University professor of early childhood education and urban education, said this momentum has been building for decades and the culture now appears primed to understand race in America from the moral perspective of the Black Lives Matter movement. Quote, sometimes you need to go too far to get there or else we might not go far enough, close quote, she said. I'm less anxious about overshooting than not ever getting there because the stakes are so high, she said. Again, you can't overshoot or go too far. Wow. I could point to a few examples in history where theories about race went too far. I might even point to our very present. It's not just individual schools, though. The National Education Association, the nation's largest labor union, has posted an entire page of BLM teaching resources, while the Black Lives Matter organization itself is also disseminating education materials. The NEA teaching themes include Justice for George Floyd Day, Transgender Day of Remembrance, Globalism and Collective Value, Queer Organizing Behind the Scenes, Unapologetically Black Day, and Student Activist Day. A link to social justice math used in Seattle public schools teaches data analysis and mathematical modeling through examples of police brutality and excessive uses of force. Quote, racism is perpetuated by silence, and silence is complicity, one NEA teacher instruction reads. And being colorblind often serves as a pretense to downplay the significance of race, denying the existence of racism, and erase the experience of students of color. We pause to note all of this was a storm coming for some time, but was triggered and accelerated, of course, by the death of George Floyd, a tragedy that to this day we don't know for certain was a racial event or not, but interestingly is seen as a racial event at this moment only based on the antagonist's skin colors. If the same exact set of incidences happened with a black cop and George Floyd, there would be no BLM marches or riots. That should say something. No? Or if George Floyd were white and the cop black, there would be no BLM, or for that matter, WLM marches or riots. And that should say something. No? Again, we find ourselves running back to a very dangerous place, I think, where skin color alone determines everything. And in the name of all that, we destroy true education in the classrooms as well as in the public sphere, including destroying the statues of men who said what I'm about to quote, a lesson I would use to replace every single thing the NEA and BLM movements are engaged in right now. May I quote? If A can prove, however conclusively, that he may of right enslave B, why may not B snatch the same argument and prove equally that he can enslave A? You say A is white and B is black. It is color then, the lighter having the right to enslave the darker? Be careful. By this rule you are to be slave to the first man you meet with a fairer skin than your own. You do not mean color exactly? You mean the whites are intellectually the superiors of blacks and therefore have the right to enslave them? Take care again. By this rule, you are to be slave to the first man you meet with an intellect superior to your own. But say you it's a question of interest, and if you can make it your interest, you have the right to enslave another. Very well, and if he can make it his interest, he has the right to enslave you. That was Abraham Lincoln, perhaps our first culture warrior. And it wasn't about small and insignificant things. And neither is losing that argument again in today's culture. I'm Seth Leibson. We'll be right back.